entrepreneurs, you've worked with young people, you've worked with older people, you've worked with schools, you've worked with people from diverse background, you've worked with neurodiverse, you've worked with people with disabilities, you've worked with all these individuals with a huge variety. So it's not just about the variety in disciplines, but it's also about the variety of profiles that you have worked with. And what I want is perhaps to get a bit of some time to reflect on the things that you perhaps would want to tell our audience about how through their difference, through their multilateral approaches, how through self-awareness, how through all the things that we've talked about and touched upon, how they can achieve something greater than themselves.
Oh, okay. Wow. How do they do it? Yes. Plot twist. I'm just trying to unpick what you're wanting me to answer there. There's a lot in that. We'll probably take several podcasts, I guess. But
let's start with this one podcast, and then we'll see about the others.
I've struggled with my own self-belief in the past, so I understand that. Like the essence of what we've been talking about, how education works in good education, isn't through extrinsic, and sometimes you have to, I'll be honest, sometimes you have to offer extrinsic motivation, of course, you know, but the full fruit comes from intrinsic, so internal motivation. And you're totally right, you have to create that environment where people feel safe to explore the inner. But part of that environment, as an educator and trainer, is to put extrinsic things in place to make sure, because if I was teaching an individual, that's different. But when you're teaching a group situation, you have to make sure there's confines and make sure there's a code of behavior where people respect each other. And of course, people don't automatically do that, in my experience. You have to put that out there for them. As a youth worker, we used to get them to agree what those rules are. So that's still sort of extrinsic, but getting them to understand intrinsically what those rules are and what safe space do they want, you know. And I still think that's a good approach if you've got time. But once you've got that space, then people learn. And it's a bit like, I guess anyone who's heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that, you know, if you aren't in a safe space, you don't have your primal needs met. And I know there's lots of debate about what that triangle means, and of course it's not as rigid as that, and I think it's flexible. But if you haven't got your primary needs met, you don't have that safety of learning that self-actualization, which is the peak of the pyramid. So if anyone doesn't know it, so you have to have your food and your water first, and then housing, and then, you know, loads of different layers up, and then the top one, once all those other needs are met, is self-actualization. You think of a pyramid as layers. So I mean, I do think it's not as rigid as that, though, because, you know, I've worked with homeless people who don't have any housing, but we're providing them with food and water, and yet they've still got a deep need for self-actualization. You know, so I don't think that it has to go in that order. But I do think that the key thing is you have to feel safe. Even if you're homeless, even if you're a war-torn country, I still think, sorry, I forgot. Wherever you are.
Not offended.
Good. That, you know, and I think this is part of that sort of linear thing, as we think, and I've encountered that the homeless, their needs are housing, food, water first, you know, and clothing, and we can't do any creative workshops with them because that's for people who are wealthy or middle class and are comfortable. And I said, well, no, let's give them the option. Don't you make that decision for them. And actually, there was a young lady. I'll give this as a great example, okay? So, because I can't actually dictate one thing for everybody, because everybody's an individual. But I'll use her as an example. Right, she'd been abused. She was a drug addict, a heroin addict, and she'd been abused by a man, and I was a male staff member, so I wasn't attached at all to anything she was doing. So she'd only see female staff members there, but she saw me, you know, bleakly, you know, because I was working it was an emergency hostel, So it's not like permanent accommodation. So they are still homeless. So they're only allowed to stay there for like 10 weeks at the most. And our job is to try and find them something a bit more permanent. And there was like 6 females and 6 males, all in the same space, all with needs. And we're trying to keep them safe and try to do the work during the day. And then we do night shifts as well. And then check, as a dry hostels, we had to check for drugs, needles, alcohol, to make sure it's a safe environment for them. And so, and you know, we know the clients, what we call clients, on a need to know basis of what their backgrounds are. So what I'm telling you now is what I found out later, more and more detail, of course, as I needed to. But I was doing these checks, so at the time I didn't actually know what caused it to be homeless. And so I was going around doing the room checks for the drugs and stuff, and making sure there's no damage, because they'll often damage their, like trash their rooms. And so I went into her room, and this is what you do daily. And there she had made, get this, you guys seen Wallace and Gromit? The plasticine or morph?
Yeah.
Wallace and Gromit, yeah. She had made...
Wonderful animation, stop motion.
Yeah. She had made a plasticine version of me and a plasticine version of the female, one of the female staff members. There's about 10 of us on the staff team. It was me and this and I was just honored. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful creation. I was so honored. And she, of course, with her background of men being abusive, right? Her first instinct was to go and destroy it because she thought she was in trouble. So she went, oh, I'm so sorry, and went to destroy it. I said, don't you dare. and she went, oh. And I said, that's beautiful. Don't you destroy something as beautiful as that. And I said, I'm so privileged you did that. And she did this little character show. And she said, I said, you've got talent. And it's the first time a man had ever said anything that wasn't obviously abusive or sexual towards her. That it was actually identifying that self-actualization in her, that she was a creative. So every worker had been saying, okay, you need to get a job, you need to get your accommodation sorted, your clothing, your food, all this, right? Next time I was on shift, she came to see me. Oh, no, that's right. No, I brought a book in. I had a book. I've still got it. She gave it back to me. But once she'd finished using it. But my wife had given me, as a birthday present that year, the making of Chicken Run by Aardman. Yeah.
Same company that
same company did Wallace and Gromit. And it was really big Chicken Run then. And so I took that in. We had no facilities there in the hostel for anything creative. So I took that in and I lended it to her. I said, look, I've got a book for you to borrow. You know, my wife gave it to me as a birthday gift, and please return it, of course, because I do want to read it myself. I haven't had a chance. But, you know, you were saying that you were struggling with the eyes. I was reading through the book, and there's this chapter there about how you do the eyes, you know, and how she was like, she couldn't believe that someone was trying to help her for her, who she was, not her needs, so to speak, but for who she really was. Anyway, the next time I was on, and she was just, she told the manager and the other staff, her key worker, her female key worker, and we all had people who were key workers for, which means you're solely responsible for their outcomes. Anyway, so when she came, she got some accommodation, right? She had trashed it. She was in an abusive relationship. She trashed it. She was still on heroin. She'd gone to rehab and it hadn't worked. And she came back again, but this time a year later. But guess what? The first person she asked for was I on shift. She wanted to talk to me. Right. Now that's a huge step for someone who's been abused by men. Right. So she came to me and then, you know, apologized that she was homeless again and stuff. And I said, no, that's fine. Just get back on the horse. You know, you deserve to have a life. You know, that's not a life, is it? You know, and we all make mistakes. Just get back on the horse. And what happened is the manager had managed to get her a place on an animation course. And she was so scared of it that she'd not turned up. Right, and you know, well, I'm going to be on an animation course and I'm a junkie, and, you know, this is how they talk about themselves, you know, and these people all from good backgrounds, I'm not, and so she didn't turn up, and I said, well, let's just try again. I'm sure the college will understand, you know. And I actually set up I set up an art group in the hostel shortly afterwards. She wasn't part of that art group, but I actually set up an art group where people would come. Initially, the staff didn't see the point of it. They said, what's the point if you do an art group? It's wasting money, it's wasting time. What you should be doing is getting on the phone, finding accommodation. I'll get back to this young lady, by the way. Let's put this into context. So you should be doing real work, not running an art group. Art, and I actually asked to do drama. I wanted to do a drama group with them. They said, no, drama's too dangerous. We'll do art instead. So, well, art is
How can drama be dangerous?
I don't know, because it deals with emotions. We need to keep those emotions repressed. But we can send them to a counselor. We have to talk about their abuse. Doesn't make sense to me, but, you know. So the young people would actually say to me, they say, we don't like going to, you know, they didn't want to go to counselors because they say, I don't want to talk about my abuse.
Right.
Because it makes me remember it. And the reason I do drugs is to forget it.
Right.
So I keep going to the cycle of talking about it and then doing drugs to forget it, because they came back really bad after each counselling session. I'm not saying all counselling's like that, but in this context, for them it was, right? They weren't given tools to cope, or they weren't spoken to their actual life. You know, who are you apart from, you're not just an abuse victim, you're not just a drug addict, you're somebody else. You know, let's treat people as if they're other things, and there will be those other things. If we just say you're a junkie, you're an abuse victim, there'll always be an abuse victim, there'll always be a junkie, if that makes sense, because you're labeling them as that, so they're going to be that. Yeah. They've got no other option, they're going on that narrow path. Anyway, so I did this art group, and within a few months, you know, one of the leads, he was like the team leader at the time. He was really anti it, me doing this art group. And then afterwards, he became my champion. And the reason he became my champion for doing it was he saw the change in the young people. So because we're quite a volatile place, you can just imagine. So all sorts of things were going on, you know, and we'd have to break up fights and stuff. And there's this rule that they all formed amongst themselves, right? When the art group is on, for the 2 hours that I did it, everyone had to behave themselves, because no one in the group wanted the disruption that I'd be taken off shift to then have to deal with stuff, right? So, or other staff had to deal with stuff. So whenever we had this art group on, everyone was like immaculate angels in this homeless hostel. And this is a brilliant story, right? So
you have to go back to the story of the lady, because
yes. Anyway, summing that up, so the staff would say, "I'm glad you're here. We're going to have peace for 2 hours." And it's not that everyone would turn up to the art group, but it's just that everyone was quiet while I was running the art group. You know, it was a safe space. So coming back to this story, so this guy, sorry, I've got to tell you this one. It's just very quick. So there was a moment the police turned up to arrest somebody in my art group, and they so Lothian and Borders Police, Edinburgh Police. And I ended up working with them after I worked at this hostel in partnership with them. But they came in to arrest this young lad who'd taken down this station for questioning. He was a prime suspect in something, and the hostel workers said, "No, you can't do it. You have to wait till the art group finishes, because it's you know, sanctus or whatever they say, you know, it's like brilliant. No one's allowed to interrupt the art group." So the police officers had to wait an hour, you know, until I'd finished, and then the lad went out and they quietly walked him off site, you know. So even the police respected it. It was just amazing. I don't know if that would still happen today, but yeah, so this guy that was really anti me doing this art group, he was recommending me everywhere he could find, right? So the people that were running the hostel, they had other projects, and he'd been promoted to other projects himself. And so I was actually asked to run a 12-week program, the art program in the community for people who are homeless.
Lance, the lady. Don't forget the
Yes,
lady.
no, this is it. This is it.
Oh, this is it. Okay.
This is it. Yeah. So I'd lost contact with her, and before then she was all wearing black and very pale skin and stuff, and she looked very sick. And she came in. I didn't recognize her. Right. So she came in, and in fact, I was so busy. I got, because my wife's a qualified art therapist, so I got her to run it, but I structured it so it was still the same sort of thing. So I wasn't actually there for all the sessions, and I'll just come in at the start, in the middle, and the end, just to make sure it's on track. And so I got my wife working for me with the permission of the charity. So I was doing it self-employed at that stage. So yeah, I was trying not to say her name, because but I still remember her name. And she came in, and I remember I came in on the sessions to see how things were doing, and she recognized me, and she said, I want to thank you so much. And so, she I think she'd been to college, she passed, she'd had her tenancy, she hadn't trashed anything, she was out of abusive relationships, she was wearing color, right? She had color to her face. She was like a transformed person. And she says, because you believed in me. You saw who I was, even when other people couldn't. And I think if you're in that situation that she was in, if you can surround yourself with people that believe in you, that happened to me. I had people who believed in me when I didn't. And that's partly why I do what I do now, is I had people that, even if I couldn't see it, they could see it, and they believed in me and took me under their wing and mentored me informally, and sometimes we lose trust in people and adults or other people because we've had bad experiences. But actually all that does is harm yourself and harms your future. You got to learn to, of course, be discerning, but still be vulnerable enough to trust other people, that they can mentor you and allow them to say the good things into your life. And if there's anyone being that horrible person, you can just move on from that, and take that. That's a risk. That's a risk, to be vulnerable enough to allow someone to mentor you and to believe in you. And I know what it's like as a person to be defensive and to put up barriers and these self-protective barriers that we put up, actually, they don't protect us. They end up damaging us because they stop us receiving true love. We think they're protecting us from attack, but actually they do stop us receiving genuine love from other people, kind people that aren't doing it to get anything from us. They're doing it because they actually really like us and they believe in us.
Yeah, it's right back to that. Right back to what you've described as a people pleaser. Nobody knows you, so nobody likes you.
Yeah,
but giving people that opportunity to be genuine, to love and be loved, I think is essential to this process. Fantastic insights.
It brings us back, just one thing, it brings us back to also something else that we were discussing in the previous episode of Interchange. And it was a discussion around Rumi. And Lana, when she quoted Rumi and said, wounds is the place where light comes in. And that is the art of vulnerability. And Brené Brown has there's this incredible TED Talk and the books and all the other TED Talks that emerge from it by Brené Brown around the art of being vulnerable and the courage that it takes to be vulnerable and to accept that vulnerability as a springboard for something better for yourself, but also could be also for others as well. Because once you accepted your position of vulnerability, you invite others into that space and you create a safe space. And in that safe environment, you can finally reach a better understanding of who you are and a better understanding of other people and get to high level of self-actualization. And another thing that is very relevant to what you said about counseling is there are so many different ways of coping, and there is no one way to do things. And this is where we go back to the idea of the multilateral versus the unilateral. There are so many different ways that function with so many different people, but there is no one thing that functions for everybody.
Yeah.
And one very important component of the process, which is based on Viktor Frankl's theory, which is logotherapy. And there's this amazing book by Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which is inspired by his experience of the concentration camps. And the big question is, how did you survive concentration camp? How were you capable of coming back after so much damage done psychologically? And the answer was logotherapy, the talk that you talk to yourself, this ability to create an identity, to design an identity that is independent from the label that has been given to you. And I think that is critical for any process of growth. And it really answers the question of how can we as individuals, whoever we are, reach a better version of ourselves and really be able to achieve something that is greater than what we thought we could achieve.
Yeah, definitely. It's not about, I mean, I think people mistake it as ego, and I think humility is also, gets a bad rap, in the sense, humility is not thinking of yourself as worse than other people. And having pride in yourself isn't thinking of yourself better than other people.
Yeah.
So that this is where both those words get a really bad rap, because they're sort of misjudged. You know, the state that we need to be in is when we think of ourselves as better than we used to be. We should not be comparing ourselves to other people, whether it's like I'm worse than other people or I'm better than them. It's both the bad aspects of the same continuum. And it's a constant battle. I mean, one thing I did learn in for myself as well, you know, you have to, because we have egos, we all do, you know, we all have a sense of self. And I think part of it, this is why I find that really difficult to answer, who am I? Because in some aspects, yeah, that can change. But something I learned in prison education was something called pro-social modeling. So then this is one of the problems with, I mean, I believe in pro-social modeling, by the way, and there's something really interesting. So in education, we tend to, and we see our politicians and everyone do this. They say one thing, but do a completely different thing. And the more we see this, and this is something I learned in public health as well, that one of the problems we have, these issues around the world, is the more people see the differences between this lack of social justice, of the powerful who have control are saying you must do this, but they're not doing it themselves. You know, say take the environment or all sorts of things. You know, so it's everyone else's responsibility, but the powerful, you know, who have power and have more control over the impact that they have on the environment. And of course, my environmentalism comes from having studied horticulture and coming from New Zealand, but I'm quite proud of that aspect of New Zealand. But yeah, so coming back to pro-social modeling. So what's pro-social modeling? Well, if you really want to change behavior in other people, and you can only give the sort of environment for that to change. But of course, in prison education, the objective is to change behavior. If you really want to change it, you have to change that behavior in yourself. So if you want to stop someone being antisocial, you have to be pro-social. And what that means is you have to respond in the way that you want to be treated. And it really essentially goes back to the sort of that quote that Jesus said, treat others how you like to be treated yourself. Essentially, you know, so I remember this young man that, you know, and I don't want to generalize, but, you know, this was an adult prison, so you had to be 21 the youngest, and usually that come from a YOI, so youth offenders prison. They come in and all really bolshy, and he was like that, and he'd come in and he didn't want to learn, and he was really aggressive. And I remember at one point I was trying to teach him, you know, some of the technical stuff with media, and he was ignoring it, and I do my own thing. I said, well, you can, but there's reasons why it won't work, and you know, if you do this will help. And he kept fighting it. So I said, well, actually, if everything you do is 100% perfect, I said, I think there's a point where you don't need to do my class, because you keep telling me that you know more than me and that you could teach this better. And why are you coming? If you know more than me, why are you coming?
Yeah,
You don't have to come.
You can only encourage with an environment and empower people. I think we've got to push things forward.
Oh, sorry. Oh, the short version is even though it's aggressive, I always treat him with respect and you know, and a year later, he's still in my class, by the way, at that point. A year later, he was saying, can I have this? And yes, please, and thank you. Right. And the prison officer came in and said, why are you talking to him like that? And you never say that on the wing, and you're aggressive and you're fine. And he says, because he treats me with respect. And so because he does that, I treat him with respect. Sorry, I just want to finish that story.
No, that's exactly the sort of message that I think needs to be out there.